They tell you a mother's love is a bottomless well. They say there is no limit to what you will sacrifice for the flesh of your flesh. I used to believe that. I really did. I preached it, even. But that was before I learned the specific metallic smell of betrayal. It is 3:14 a.m. The kitchen is freezing because I've turned the thermostat down to 62 degrees to compensate for the last month's overage. Outside, the Ohio winter is throwing itself against the siding of my small bungalow, the wind howling like something wounded. Inside, the only light comes from the small, harsh bulb of the stove hood and the glow of my iPad screen. I wrap my thick wool cardigan tighter around my chest. It smells of mothballs and age. On the table in front of me sits my life, dismantled into a series of terrifying piles. A stack of past due notices, a calculator, a red pen. I look at the banking app open on the screen. The numbers are bright red, mocking my 30 years of service as the head librarian of the county branch. Available balance, negative $14.50. I stare at the negative sign. It looks like a small horizontal scar. My heart does a frantic fluttering thing in my chest, a hummingbird trapped in a rib cage. I am 68 years old. I own my home. I have never, not once in my life, been overdrawn. I treat debt like a disease. But the disease is here. It's sleeping in the guest room down the hall, snoring with a rhythm that used to comfort me when he was a baby, but now makes my skin crawl. My son, Jason, the architect of my ruin. Before the storm, there was the quiet. I need to remember the quiet. I need to remember who I was before he came back just to prove to myself that she existed. My life was small, yes, but it was exquisite in its order. I retired 3 years ago. The silence of my home was not lonely, it was a luxury. My days were measured in the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the scent of lavender furniture polish. I lived by the envelope system. My father taught it to me, and it had survived the digital age because it worked. On the first of every month, I withdrew my pension and Social Security in cash. I sat at this very table and divided the bills into white envelopes labeled in my cursive script: groceries, utilities, taxes, church, fun. If the fun envelope was empty, I didn't go to the cinema. It was simple. It was safe. My savings account was a fortress, built brick by brick, $5 at a time, intended to keep me from ever becoming a burden to anyone. I remember the Tuesday he arrived. It was October, the leaves just starting to turn the color of bruised peaches. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. The postman usually came at 11. I opened the door, and there he was, Jason. He didn't look like a failure. He looked like success. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, a crisp white shirt and polished leather shoes. He was 42, but in that soft autumn light, he looked 25 again. He had that smile, the one that could charm a dog off a meat wagon. "Hi, Mom," he said. He held a duffel bag, but just a small one, leather, expensive. "Jason," I wiped my hands on my apron. "What on earth? Are you okay?" He sighed, a heavy, dramatic exhale that slumped his broad shoulders. He stepped inside without asking, bringing a gust of cool air with him. "It's a long story, Mom. Sarah and we're taking a break. It's temporary, just a rough patch." He walked into the living room, looking around with nostalgia that felt genuine at the time. "God, it smells good in here, like old books and lemons. I missed this." He turned to me, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I just need a place to crash for the weekend, just until my new commission check clears and I can get a deposit on an apartment downtown. I don't want to be a burden." A burden. The word triggered the conditioned response in my DNA. "Don't be silly. I said, my voice warm, the trap snapping shut around my own ankle. "You're my son. You're never a burden. The guest room is made up." I made him a roast pot that night. He ate 3 helpings. I was happy. The house felt fuller, warmer. I thought I was being a mother. I didn't know I was being a host organism. They call it the boiling frog effect. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cold water and slowly turn up the heat, it will boil to death without ever realizing it's dying. Jason turned up the heat so slowly, I didn't feel the burn until my skin was already peeling. The weekend turned into a week. "The bank is dragging their feet on the check, Mom. Compliance issues. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, but I nodded. He was the businessman. I was just a librarian. The week turned into a month. The first change was sensory. My house, which had always smelled of lavender and paper, began to smell heavy. It was a mixture of stale pepperoni, unwashed gym clothes, and a damp, musky odor that seeped from under the guest room door. The order began to fracture. I would wake up at 6 a.m. to find the living room in disarray, sofa cushions on the floor, a half-eaten sandwich balancing precariously on the arm of my velvet chair. Then the envelope system began to fail. "Mom, can you spot me 50 for gas? I have a job interview in Columbus." I took it from the groceries envelope. "Mom, I forgot my wallet and the pizza guy's at the door. Can you grab it?" I took it from the utilities envelope. He stopped buying his own food. At first, he would bring home a bottle of wine or a bag of fancy coffee as a peace offering. By week 4, that stopped. He began to raid the fridge with the entitlement of a teenager. I would buy a roast for Sunday dinner, and by Saturday morning, it would be gone, eaten cold, straight from the Tupperware, leaving only grease smears in the sink. But the blue light that haunted me. I suffer from insomnia. Often I wander the house at 3 a.m. In November, I started noticing the flicker. Jason would be sitting in the dark living room, the volume low, his face illuminated by the ghastly blue glow of the television. He wasn't watching movies. He was watching horse racing, poker tournaments. Sometimes he was just staring at his phone, his thumbs moving in a blur, his eyes glassy and unblinking. "Jason?" I whispered. "Go to bed, Mom," he snapped, not looking up. The charm of the charcoal suit was gone. He spent his days in sweatpants now. The suit was balled up in the corner of the guest room, gathering dust. Then came the bills. December in Ohio is cruel. I keep my house at 68 degrees. It is sensible. One morning I walked past the thermostat and saw it set to 75 degrees. I gasped. I turned it down. An hour later, it was back at 75. "Jason," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we can't run the heat like this. It's too expensive." He was eating cereal out of the box, standing in the middle of the kitchen. "I'm freezing, Mom. What are you, a miser? You're sitting on that pension. Live a little. Comfort isn't a crime." "I am on a fixed income," I reminded him. Yeah, fixed income. I hear it every day. I'll pay you back double when my deal closes next week. Stop counting pennies, it's depressing." Gaslighting. I know the term now. I looked it up at the library. It's when someone makes you question your own reality. He made me feel cheap for wanting to be able to pay the electric bill. He made me feel like a jailer for asking him to pick up his wet towels. I retreated. I started wearing 2 sweaters. I stopped buying meat. I ate toast for dinner so he could have the steaks he requested. But the math was relentless. I sat down in early January to reconcile the ledger. I opened the emergency tin I kept hidden in the back of the flour canister. It was my secret stash, $300 in 20s for a plumber or a doctor. I reached in. My fingers brushed the bottom of the tin. Empty. My stomach dropped. I pulled the tin out and shook it upside down. A dusting of flour fell onto the counter. Nothing. I walked to the living room. Jason was asleep on the couch at 1 p.m., a game show blaring on the TV. "Jason," I shaken his shoulder. He grunted, swatting my hand away.
"Did you take the money from the flour tin?" He sat up, rubbing his face, looking annoyed rather than guilty. "Jesus, Mom, good morning to you too. Yeah, I borrowed it. I needed to get my phone turned back on so I could take calls from recruiters. You want me to get a job, don't you?" "You stole from me." "Borrowed," he corrected, standing up and towering over me. "Borrowed. You're my mother, not a bank. Stop acting like I robbed you at gunpoint. I'll put it back on Friday." He didn't put it back on Friday. The end of the beginning came 3 days ago. I was in the kitchen, staring at a disconnect notice from the water company. He had been taking 45-minute showers. He said the hot water helped his stress back. The phone rang. I picked it up, expecting it to be the pharmacy. "Hello? Mrs. Margaret Vance?" A sterile female voice. "Yes? This is Sarah from the fraud department at Chase Bank. We're calling to verify some unusual activity on your Platinum Rewards visa, ending in 4099. I frowned, gripping the receiver. "I think you have the wrong number. I don't have a Chase credit card. I only use a debit card." There was a pause on the line, the sound of typing. "I see. Well, Mrs. Vance, a card was opened in your name 6 weeks ago. The Social Security number matches. The address matches." The world tilted slightly to the left. "Opened? By who?" "It was an online application. We're calling because the card has reached its credit limit of $5,000, and there was an attempt to charge another $500 at a site called Lucky Strike Casino about 10 minutes ago." $5,000. My knees gave out. I actually sank into the kitchen chair, the receiver trembling against my ear. "Read me the charges," I whispered. "Liquor World, DraftKings, Steam Gaming, DoorDash, ATM withdrawal, Main Street Strip Club." "Stop," I choked out. "Please stop." I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. Not yet. The librarian in me took over. I needed evidence. Jason was out. He said he was at a networking lunch. I went to the garage. The garbage truck was coming tomorrow, so the bins were full. I tipped the kitchen bag out onto the cold concrete floor. I didn't care about the smell. I put on my gardening gloves and began to sort. I found them at the bottom, buried under wet coffee grounds and beer cans. Letters from Chase, addressed to me, opened, crumbled up, and hidden. He had been intercepting the mail. I smoothed out the wrinkled paper. There was my name. There was the balance, $4,982.11. The rage started in my toes. It wasn't hot. It was ice cold. It was the fury of a woman who had saved coupons for 40 years to build a safety net, only to have it slashed by the one person she was supposed to trust. I heard the front door open. "Mom, I'm home. Good news, I think I got a lead on a sales manager position." His voice was cheerful, fake. I grabbed the crumpled statement and walked into the kitchen. He was taking off his coat, smiling. He looked well-fed. He looked happy. I didn't say a word. I just held up the paper. Jason froze. His smile didn't fade naturally. It simply vanished, replaced with a look of cold calculation. He didn't look ashamed. He looked caught. "You went through my trash," he said. His voice was low, dangerous. "My trash?" I corrected, my voice shaking. "My house, my name. You stole my identity, Jason. You committed a felony." "Oh, stop with the drama," he scoffed, turning toward the fridge. "I needed liquidity. It's an investment. I'm going to win it back, pay off the card, and keep the profit. I was doing it for us." "Gambling is not an investment," I screamed. I had never screamed at him before. "You spent $5,000 on liquor and strippers in my name. Get out. I want you out of this house tonight." He stopped. He closed the fridge door slowly. He turned to face me. He is 6'2". I'm 5'3". He walked toward me. I took a step back, hitting the counter. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I live here." "You are a guest. I have rights," he shouted, his face suddenly red, the veins in his neck bulging. "You think you can just toss me out in the snow? I'm your son." "You are a thief," I yelled back, waving the paper at him. Wham! His fist flew past my face. It connected with the drywall just 3 inches from my left ear. The sound was sickening, a crunch of plaster and laugh. Dust puffed out into the air, coating my cheek. I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut, my breath caught in a terrified hiccup. Silence. I opened my eyes. His fist was buried in the wall. He pulled it out slowly, white dust falling from his knuckles. He looked at the hole, then looked at me. His eyes were dead. There was no apology in them. "Don't push me, Margaret," he whispered. He didn't call me Mom. He turned and walked into the living room, turning on the TV. I stood there, the white dust settling on my cardigan, staring at the jagged hole in my wall. It looked like a wound that would never heal. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my bedroom, a heavy dining room chair wedged under the doorknob, listening to the silence of the house. It was a heavy, loaded silence, like the air in a room where a gun has just been fired. The hole in the wall outside remained. It was a third eye staring at me, unblinking and full of accusations. The next morning, I didn't make coffee. I didn't want him to smell it and come into the kitchen. Instead, I waited until I heard the shower running, the water heater groaning in protest, and I slipped out the back door. I drove straight to the only person I knew who looked at numbers as religiously as I did, Sarah Jenkins, my financial advisor. Sarah is a sharp woman in her 50s who wears rimless glasses and doesn't believe in sugarcoating. We sat in her office, surrounded by the hum of servers and the smell of stale office coffee. She projected a graph onto the wall. It looked like a cliff. "Margaret," she said, her laser pointer tracing the red line that plummeted downward, "we need to look at this without emotion. This is simple arithmetic." She tapped the screen. "You are drawing down your principal to cover his gambling debts and the household overhead, which has tripled. You've lost 12% of your retirement nest egg in 8 weeks. At this rate of spending, assuming he doesn't open another credit card, you will be insolvent in 18 months. "Insolvent?" I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "Bankrupt," she corrected. "Homeless. The house will go to a lien sale to pay for the care you'll eventually need, but won't be able to afford." She turned on the lights. "It's him or the house, Maggie. Choose, because right now you're choosing him and he is eating you alive." I drove home with a new kind of resolve. It wasn't courage, it was the primal terror of a drowning woman realizing she has to kick the person dragging her down. When I walked in, Jason was on the couch. He was eating a sandwich made from the last of the turkey I'd bought for myself. He didn't look up. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was trembling, but I stood my ground. "I'm watching the game, Mom." "Turn it off." He sighed, exaggerated and loud, and muted the TV. "What, did you go cry to your friends about the wall? I told you I'll patch it." "I don't care about the wall," I said. "I care about the math. I just came from the financial planner. You are bankrupting me, Jason. I can't afford you. I can't afford the heat, the food, or the theft." I took a breath, steeling myself. "You have to leave. I want you out by Friday." I expected yelling. I expected him to punch another hole in the wall.
Instead, he laughed. It was a dry, mirthless chuckle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "He figured you'd try this," he said, tapping the screen. "You always were dramatic." He held up the phone. It was a web page for the Ohio landlord-tenant law. "Read it and weep, Mom." I squinted at the small text. "Residency is established after 30 days, Jason recited, as if he were reading a scripture. "I've been here almost 90. I receive mail here, thanks to those credit card statements you found. I have belongings here. That makes me a tenant at will." He stood up, walking to me, invading my personal space. "You can't kick me out. That's an illegal eviction. If you change the locks, I'll call the police and they will let me back in. If you throw my stuff on the lawn, I'll sue you for damages." "I'm your mother," I whispered, horrified. "You would sue your own mother?" "I would protect my rights," he said smoothly. "If you want me out, you have to file a formal eviction notice with the court. In this county, that takes about 3 months to process, maybe 4 if I contest it, and I will contest it." He leaned down, his breath smelling of my coffee. "So unless you want to spend the last of your money on lawyers, I suggest you sit down, shut up, and make me some lunch. I'm staying." He unmuted the TV. That was the moment the house ceased to be a home. It became a war zone. The psychological warfare began immediately. Jason knew I was frugal, so he attacked my wallet through the utilities. I would come home from the library, where I had started spending my days just to avoid him, to find the house sweltering. A blast of heat would hit me the moment I opened the door. 80 degrees. He would be sitting in his boxers in the living room, sweating. "It's tropical in here," I'd cry, rushing to the thermostat. "I have poor circulation," he'd say, not looking away from his phone. "Don't touch it, it's chilly." If I turned it down, he would turn it back up the moment I left the room. It was a game of attrition. He knew I would break before he did, because I was the one paying the bill. I stopped cooking. I started keeping a cooler in the trunk of my car with cheese, crackers, and apples, because if I put food in the refrigerator, he ate it within the hour. The silence in the house was replaced by the constant, aggressive noise of his existence. He took phone calls on speakerphone at 2 a.m., shouting at creditors or booking imaginary deals. He slammed doors. He stomped. I retreated. I went to the hardware store and bought a heavy-duty deadbolt. I installed it on my bedroom door myself, my arthritic hands aching as I turned the screwdriver. That night, for the first time in 40 years, I locked myself in my own bedroom. The click of the lock was deafening. It was the sound of a border being drawn. I lay in bed, listening to him pacing in the hallway outside my door. He would pause right in front of it. I could hear his breathing. I gripped the sheets, waiting for him to try the handle. He never did. He just stood there, letting me know he was there, letting me know he was the warden. The body can only sustain a state of fight or flight for so long before it begins to consume itself. It happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the squatters' rights speech. I was in the kitchen trying to make tea. The sink was full of his dishes, crusted plates, glasses with cigarette ash in the bottom. The smell was revolt-inducing. I reached for the kettle, and suddenly the room narrowed. A sharp, crushing pain bloomed in the center of my chest. It felt like a giant hand had reached through my ribs and squeezed my heart into a fist. The pain radiated down my left arm, turning my fingers to ice. I gasped, dropping the kettle. It clattered loudly onto the tile floor. "Oh," I said. It was a small, surprised sound. My knees buckled. I slumped against the cabinets and slid down to the linoleum. The room was spinning. Gray spots danced in my vision. I couldn't breathe. It felt like I was drowning in the air. "Jason!" I wheezed. I couldn't yell. "Jason!" I heard heavy steps. He came into the kitchen, holding his phone. He looked annoyed. "What is it now? I'm on a call." He looked down at me. I was clutching my chest, my face pressed against the cold floor. I looked up at him, my eyes pleading. "Chest pain," I managed to whisper. "Help! 911." Jason didn't drop the phone. He didn't rush to my side. He stood there, towering over me, and looked at his screen. He tapped out a text message. Tap, tap, tap. I watched his thumbs move. Time seemed to stretch. Every second was a lifetime. I was dying on the kitchen floor, and my son was finishing a text. He finally slipped the phone into his pocket. He sighed and looked at me with a mixture of pity and irritation. "You're having a panic attack, Mom. You're working yourself up. Just breathe." "Heart," I gasped. "Hospital." He looked at the clock on the stove. "I can't drive you right now. I have a Zoom meeting in 10 minutes. This is a huge opportunity." He stepped over my legs to get a glass of water from the tap. He drank it, standing over my prone body. "Call an Uber," he said. "If they say it's serious, let me know. But I really think you're just being dramatic to make me feel bad." He walked out of the kitchen. I lay there, the tears hot on my face, mixing with the cold sweat of a cardiac event. I didn't cry because of the pain. I cried because the umbilical cord had finally been severed. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. I dialed 911, but my fingers were too numb. I opened the Uber app instead. It was muscle memory. I crawled to the front door. I dragged myself across the living room carpet, past his discarded pizza boxes, past the television blaring a soap opera. I pulled myself up by the doorknob and fell out onto the porch into the freezing snow, just as the gray Toyota Camry pulled into the driveway. The driver, a young man with a beard, rushed up the walk. "Ma'am, oh my God, are you okay?" "Hospital," I whispered. He helped me into the back seat. As we pulled away, I looked back at the house. The curtains were drawn. The blue light of the TV flickered in the window. He hadn't even checked to see if I made it to the car. I spent 24 hours in the hospital. It wasn't a heart attack. It was Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome, stress-induced chest pain that mimics a coronary. The doctor, a kind woman with tired eyes, told me my cortisol levels were off the charts. "You are under immense pressure, Margaret," she said. "If you don't change your environment, your heart might not be so lucky next time." "I know," I said. Jason didn't visit, he didn't call. I texted him, admitted, doctors running tests. He replied 4 hours later, "Kay, keep me posted. Don't let them overcharge you." When I was discharged the next evening, I felt different. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The mother who had opened the door in October was dead. She had died on the kitchen floor while her son sent a text message. The Uber dropped me off at 7 p.m. I noticed the cars first. There were 4 of them parked in my driveway and on the grass. A rusted pickup truck, a sports car with a dented bumper, and 2 nondescript sedans. I stood on the sidewalk, my hospital bracelet still on my wrist, clutching my discharge papers. I could hear the music from the street, heavy bass, thumping. I walked up the path. My front door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The air inside was thick, blue with cigarette smoke. It stung my eyes. My living room, my sanctuary of lavender and quiet, was unrecognizable. Jason had pushed the dining table into the center of the living room. He was sitting at the head of it, wearing sunglasses indoors, holding a fan of playing cards. Around him sat 5 strangers, men with rough faces, women with too much makeup. There were beer bottles on my grandmother's antique coasters. A pile of cash sat in the middle of the table. Someone was ashing a cigar into my potted fern. They stopped talking when I walked in. The music, some aggressive hip-hop track, kept thumping. Jason looked up. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed that the party had been interrupted. "Jace," Jason said, his voice slurring slightly. "This is my mother." "She's harmless. Go to bed, Mom. We're in the middle of a hand." I stood in the doorway. I looked at the cigar ash on my fern. I looked at the mud tracked onto my cream carpet. I looked at my son, the stranger who wore my father's face. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask them to leave. I realized then that you cannot reason with a cancer. You have to cut it out. "I'm going to my room," I said softly. "Good," Jason said, turning back to the table. "Raise your 50. I walked down the hall. I didn't go to bed. I went to my desk. I opened my ledger. I turned to a fresh page. I sat there in the dark, listening to the raucous laughter of the strangers in my house, and I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police, not yet. I called the one number the sheriff had whispered to me weeks ago, a number for a specific kind of lawyer. The numbers don't lie, and I was done losing. It was time to balance the books.
Tears are a luxury I could no longer afford. They blur the vision, and when you are at war, you need to see clearly. The morning after the poker party, I didn't hide in my room. I didn't tremble. I woke up at 6 a.m., dressed in my best wool trousers and a pressed blouse, and went to work. Not to the library, though that is where I did my research, but to the business of reclaiming my life. I became a ghost in my own home. I stopped engaging. When Jason baited me, calling me a miser or a hag because I wouldn't give him cash for takeout, I didn't respond. I simply pressed record on the voice memo app hidden in my apron pocket. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I looked that up. I documented everything. I took high-resolution photos of the hole in the drywall. I photographed the pile of unpaid bills he had hidden in the trash. I downloaded the audio files of him screaming at me, the vibrations of his rage captured in digital waveforms. Then I found the weapon I needed. It wasn't a gun, it was a statute. Ohio Revised Code 3113.31, Domestic Violence and Civil Protection Orders. Jason was right about the eviction laws. They were slow, but he was wrong about the definition of abuse. He thought abuse was only a black eye. The law, however, recognized imminent fear of physical harm and trespass in a habitation. The hole in the wall, combined with the financial exploitation of an elderly person, me, changed the classification. It wasn't a landlord-tenant dispute anymore. It was a crime scene. I met Sheriff Miller at a diner on the edge of town 3 days later. It was neutral ground, smelling of burnt bacon and floor wax. I'd known Jim Miller since he was a boy checking out Hardy Boys mysteries at my branch. He was a man now, with gray at his temples and a heavy badge on his chest. I slid the manila folder across the Formica table. He opened it. He looked at the photo of the wall. He read the hospital discharge summary, Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, stress-induced. He listened to the recording of Jason screaming, "I'll burn this whole house down if you don't give me the card." Jim looked up, his face hard. "This is enough, Margaret. This is more than enough for an emergency ex parte order. The judge will sign this within the hour." "But he won't leave," I said, my voice steady. "He says he has rights." "Not with a protection order," Jim said. "With this, his residency doesn't matter. He's an immediate threat. We can remove him." He leaned in.
But Margaret, for this to go smoothly, we need a window. If we try to drag him out while he's entrenched on the couch, things get broken, people get hurt. Does he ever leave? I said, he buys lottery tickets and cigarettes every day at 4 p.m. He goes to the gas station on the corner. He's gone for 20 minutes. Jim nodded. That's your window. Call us the second he steps off the porch. The next day, Friday, was the longest day of my life. The air in the house was static, charged with the impending storm. Jason was in a foul mood. He had lost big at online blackjack the night before. He paced the living room, kicking at the furniture. I need $20, he demanded at 3:45 p.m. I didn't argue. I opened my purse and handed him a $20 bill. It was the best investment I had ever made. Finally, he grunted. He grabbed his coat. I'll be back. Don't touch the thermostat. He opened the front door. The cold wind rushed in. He stepped out. The door clicked shut. I watched through the sheer curtains until his gray Camry turned the corner. Go. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I pulled my phone out and dialed 2 numbers. First, the sheriff. He's gone. You have 20 minutes. Second, the locksmith. He was parked 2 streets over, waiting for my signal. Now! I ran to the door and threw the deadbolt. Then I ran to the back door and locked it. I locked the windows. I was sealing the airlock. The locksmith's van screeched into the driveway 2 minutes later. He was a burly man named Dave, and he knew the situation. He didn't ask questions. He ran to the door with a drill in his hand. The sound of the drill biting into the metal of the lock was violent and loud, a high-pitched scream of steel against steel. "Hurry," I whispered, wringing my hands. "Please, hurry." "Almost got it, ma'am," Dave grunted. Metal shavings fell on the welcome mat. He popped the old cylinder out. He shoved the new high-security deadbolt in. 10 minutes gone. I saw the sheriff's cruiser pull up quietly down the street, out of sight. They were waiting. 15 minutes. "Done," Dave said. He handed me a heavy silver key. "That won't budge for anything less than a battering ram." "Thank you," I said, pressing a check into his hand. "Go, please." Dave packed up and drove off. I stood alone in the hallway. The silence was absolute. I clutched the new key so hard the metal bit into my palm. 18 minutes. I heard the engine first, the distinct rattle of the Camry's muffler. He was back. I stood 5 feet from the door. I didn't hide. I needed him to see me through the sightlight window. Heavy footsteps on the porch, the jingle of keys. Then the sound of his key sliding into the lock. It stopped halfway. He jiggled it. He pulled it out and tried again. Clink, clink. "What the hell?" he heard him mutter. Then the handle rattled. He tried to turn it. It was solid as stone. "Mom!" he called out. "Mom, the lock is jammed!" I didn't answer. He rang the doorbell once, twice. Then he held it down. The chime rang incessantly, a maddening echo in the empty hall. "Margaret!" he shouted. "Open the damn door. It's freezing out here." I stepped into the view of the thin window next to the door. Our eyes met through the glass. He looked confused, then furious. He saw the defiance in my posture. "You changed the locks?" he screamed. He kicked the door. Thud. The whole house shook. "You can't do that. I told you. I'll sue you. Open it or I'll break it down." He backed up, preparing to ram his shoulder into the wood. That's when the blue and red lights washed over him. 2 cruisers pulled into the driveway, boxing in his car. Sheriff Miller and 2 deputies stepped out, hands resting near their belts. Jason froze. He spun around, his face transforming from rage to a practiced mask of victimhood. "Officer!" Jason yelled, pointing at the house. Thank God! My mother, she's having an episode. She locked me out. I live here. She's off her meds." Sheriff Miller walked up the driveway slowly. He didn't smile. "Jason Vance?" the sheriff asked. "Yes, tell her to open the door." "I have a court order here," Miller said, holding up a packet of papers. "This is an order of protection. It states that you are to vacate these premises immediately and have no contact with Margaret Vance. You are to stay 500 feet away from this property." Jason laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That's ridiculous. I have residency. You can't just—" "This overrides residency, son," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "You have two choices. You can get in your car and leave right now, or you can go to the county jail for violating a court order. Choose." Jason looked at the sheriff, then looked at the deputies. Finally, he looked back at the window. He looked at me. For a second, I saw the boy I had raised. I saw the child who used to bring me dandelions. But then the mask slipped back into place. I saw the stranger who had stolen my retirement. "I'm your son!" he screamed at the glass. He wasn't pleading, he was accusing. "How can you do this to me?" I placed my hand on the glass, right over his face. "Goodbye, Jason," I whispered. He spat on the ground. He turned, snatched the papers from the sheriff, and marched to his car. He slammed the door so hard I thought the window would shatter. He backed out of the driveway, his tires spinning on the ice, and sped away. The sheriff tipped his hat to me through the window. I watched the taillights disappear. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the heavy, loaded silence of the last 3 months. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a battlefield after the armies have gone. I walked into the living room. It smelled of stale beer and cheap cologne. There was a burn mark on the coffee table. I went to the kitchen table. I opened my ledger. I picked up my red pen. I looked at the final tally. Debt, minus $15,430. My savings were gone. My emergency fund was gone. I would be paying off the credit card he opened for the next 5 years. I would have to work part-time at the library until I was 75. I closed the book. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow falling on the empty driveway. The house was cold, but I didn't turn up the heat. I put on my kettle. I would have tea, and then I would clean. I would scrub the floors. I would wash the curtains. I would burn the sheets from the guest bed. They tell you a mother's love is unconditional. They say there is no limit to what you will sacrifice. They are wrong. The limit exists. I found it at minus $14.50. I took a sip of my tea. The steam warmed my face. I lost a son that winter, but I got my life back.